You're listening to the Hello World podcast, number 40. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. On today's show, I have Kathleen Dollard, and boy, I have been begging her to do the show since about episode 1, maybe even before I started the show. Kathleen wants to teach you to code better. There's more to learn about the tools you use every day and the tools you aren't using yet. Coding is our passion and debugging is our challenge. You'll be happier if you do both better. Kathleen's written dozens of articles, spoken at conferences and user groups around the world, and pushes Microsoft to respond to your real-world needs as a longtime MVP. Her open source project, RoslynDom, offers alternative access to the information in the .NET compiler platform. Roslyn with load, interrogate, mutate, build, SyntaxTree model. She has courses in the Pluralsight library and a series of C#6 webcasts now available for free on WintellectNOW. I can't even remember the first place I met Kathleen, but we seem to have known each other for quite a long time now. Whenever we run into each other at different conferences, it's great to catch up and just talk to her about both her life and how development is changing over the years. I love how she's always been focused on the next 5 and the next 10 years of software development, not just in what is going on now. In today's episode, I talked to Kathleen about her journey in software development and how that's changed over the years. Kathleen's got a really interesting story. Let's take a listen. Well, today on the podcast, I have Kathleen Dollard, and boy, has it been fun trying to get her on the show. How are you doing, Kathleen?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. So I've been begging you to do the show for how many months?
Oh, a long time. I think since before you even started it. And
was it that you just didn't want to be associated with me? I mean, I get that a lot. So
No, I love you, Sean. No, that wasn't the problem. No, it's that. So the reason that I hesitated to do it is because if I start telling you my stories, it's going to come out that I'm really old. And the reason that bothers me is not because I want people to think that I'm not old. It's just that I know a lot of people that are my age and older and all that are thinking about how to slow their lives down. And I'm thinking about how to speed mine up. I mean, I'm so excited about everything that's going on. I'm so excited about the next decade or two in this industry that I really want to focus on that. And I feel like because I'm not young, I'm not one of these great, young, energetic people that I'm so happy are in the industry that people are going to think, oh, well, she's old, so she's not going to be like excited about the next 20 years. And so that's why I'm going to have to admit that I'm old. And that was why it was hard for you to talk me into coming on the show.
But my impression of you over the years has been that you are excited about what's new always. I mean, this isn't a recent invention that you're like, ooh, I'm excited about what's about to happen. You've always been there.
That's true. I have been. And it's partly because I tend to think a little ahead of the game that we're playing right now. Mm-hmm. And that's not been good for me financially, but it has been good for me in terms of just absolutely having a great time all along because we are doing such great things. And, 5 years ago, it wasn't as clear that we have decades to go in fantastic new things that we're going to be able to do. We're a long way from even C# being tied up, much less everything else that we have on the table. JavaScript isn't tied up. We've got the ECMA. I always get the numbers mixed up. ECMA 6 is the upcoming one.
Yeah.
We're going to have a new JavaScript, for goodness sake. I mean, our world is so vibrant right now that it has always been vibrant, but I just keep seeing it get faster and more vibrant and more stuff going on and more to get excited about. And I just can't imagine anything that could be cooler in the universe.
That's funny. So, I'm going to ask the, proverbial question, where did you get started? Is this something you did in college? Is it something you were interested in as a kid?
Well, you have to go back, dial back. I was a kid a long time ago. And this is why, to understand this, I really have to tell you how long ago it was. So I was in junior high in 1972, and that's a long time ago. I happen to have grown up in a city called Huntsville, Alabama. And I have to explain to people now what that means. Huntsville was one of 3 or 4 cities that were integral to the space program. We designed and built the rockets in Huntsville. The roads between Huntsville and Cape Canaveral were designed in order to carry these very, very large rockets to Florida from Huntsville. So that was what Huntsville was. And we had this weird little world. And one aspect of that weird little world was that in 1972, there was a computer that had already been cast off from NASA that was the same shape as the IBM PC.
Interesting.
So it looked like a PC in 1972. It was a Hewlett-Packard machine. I thought it had a 2 kilobyte drive, but somebody who knew the machine has since told me that they think it was an 8 kilobyte drive.
Wow.
And I didn't misspeak. It really was 8 kilobytes.
But that was in 1972. That was enormous.
Yeah, it was a lot, but all I knew how to do was the logic. So things that I wasn't really otherwise having a chance to learn. And then what also happened was that I was not a good student. I was a very bad girl. And so I was a problem child, what we would have called high risk today. And I had a math teacher who knew what a problem I had been. This was the 8th grade. And we had this math lab, and there was this computer in the math lab. And he knew I'd been a problem. And he said, if you do your work and you take the tests, you can work on your own as fast as you want to work. And when you're ahead, you can go to the math lab. So I finished the book by halfway through the year. So I had lots of time to play with this computer, which, remember, I said was a cast off in 1972 because the story's not quite over. So that's when I first learned how to write little programs and do little things like that. And it was fantastic fun. It was a game. It was great.
And what language, if you know?
It was all basic. It was all basic. So
okay.
Very, very long history in BASIC. Yes. So then I went to university, again in Huntsville, the University of Alabama in Huntsville. And there I took a Fortran course because I liked computers, right?
Uh-huh.
Oh my God, it was awful. You think of this and these are like old stereotypes that I don't even know if people even hear anymore. But first of all, there was punch cards and these morons. And I swear this really happened. I'm a 19-year-old college student and I'm a girl and I'm taking this course. They dropped my freaking punch cards. They did it on purpose because they got to then, be funny about the whole thing. And I'm
Sure.
like, I'm hanging on by, I hated this course. I really hated it. So I thought I would never do anything with computers again. So then I wind up working in the physics lab because I was a chemist. I'm trained as a chemist, a crystallographer. And so working there, they had the computers in the back of the lab that I was taking care of. And guess what? It was the same computer. This is now like 1978. Remember, this computer was cast off in 1972. So I kind of kept him running and did a little bit, but not a whole lot with him. And as a crystallographer, you have to do programming. You can't not program because, Fourier transfers are the core of the crystallography that we were doing. And so then I go to university. I had a bad experience. I left. I came back, blah, blah, in my graduate school. And I wound up doing electrochemistry. And we had a whole lot of calculations to do. So I went to my professor, who was a brand new professor, and I said, I can't do this just in my, 4-function calculator. He says, I'll loan you my scientific calculator. And I said, oh, that's going to suck. And I said, I think we need a computer. And he said, oh, there's one in the closet upstairs. So I swear I did my entire master's degree on the same computer. And this is 1985 on the same computer, a different exact one, but a different piece of
the same
metal
hardware,
was different, but exactly the same design as the one that I had first met in 1972. So I did survive that. I did do my graduate thesis in script. I've worked with a PDP-11. I've done all that kind of stuff. And so it was an interesting background because I always gravitated to the small machines. And my positive life with computers actually started around 1985 when I started working at a company that if I say too much about, it will be negative. So I won't say what company it was. But there, I helped bring the PCs in. And it was a time and a place where people said there will never be any PCs in this. We're a research facility. We will never have PCs here. It's too dangerous.
Right.
And then, it's like, we need to get the HR person off a typewriter. So the first PC I brought in was one locked in a room that I was not able to be near except when someone was looking over my shoulder. And then AutoCAD was so much cheaper than the options, that we brought AutoCAD in. And by then we had cracked things. And so in the 3 or 4 years I spent there, we brought PCs in, and it was great. And that size machine has been my career with computers. It's been fun.
So you started your post-master's work, and you were working as a chemist at the time, or were you really working as a developer?
No, I was working as a chemist. I went to work for a company as a chemist, and then through a course of a series of very unfortunate events, I wound up working in their computer department. And this is back when we had washing machine size hard drives, and we booted the computer with dip switches, although I never actually programmed with dip switches.
Sure.
I had the opportunity to talk to people that had programmed before we had addressable memory. And if you want to think of watersheds in computer history, it's when your data has to be at a specific point, exact specific point. That's a very different kind of programming than anything we've ever done.
Absolutely.
So it was a very different world then. And that was on data generals. We used a lot of data general equipment. And I moved into writing lab information systems. And so that was my first foray into computers. Moved on to Clipper and writing computer programs for labs in Clipper for a environmental company. And that was great. It was a lab that I could move up in management, and by, 1987, 88, I was the manager of information systems for a national lab. So it was my foray into management that didn't go well. I mean, it went fine, but my ethics and the ethics of that company didn't really match. And so in the end, I left. So
let me ask you about that. You came up in chemistry. You started doing development because it was kind of part of the path that you were led down.
Right.
I'm always curious, with especially with women of different ages, how you think sex sort of played into that. Do you think you were able to be a developer in the 80s because you were a chemist, or? Well,
sex is actually why I have 2 kids.
Well, I'm aware of that.
I guess that sounds really awful. It sounds like there's only twice, but we'll just drop that line of questioning. You
don't have to mention the rest of them.
Yeah. Okay.
You only have proof of twice, and that's fine.
We're changing the subject.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because I have to say that in general, it's been neutral or positive for my career.
That's great.
It's been positive in that people remember me. I don't have to work as hard to have a persona that stands out because I'm standing out among a handful of people. Now, on the other hand, I cannot tell you the number of times that people have called me Deborah or asked me what I know about and asked me a question about Indie Framework. So it's interesting in that way as well. But the other thing, and I actually, I've thought a lot about whether to even bring this up, but I think I will. When I said the first company I worked for, I didn't want to say who it was. It's because the reason I moved into the computers was actually because I was in a fairly severe sexual harassment situation where had I chosen to bring a lawsuit, I would have won. There's no doubt in my mind that that's true. It was well known that it was an unacceptable situation, and I was put into it for the wrong reasons at the wrong time with the wrong person. And in the end, I decided that I didn't want to go that route, but I did walk into the manager's office and I said, "You're going to change me into the computer group. Do I have to explain why?" And he said, "No. Can you give me 2 weeks?" I said, "Yes." And that was that. And that was why I made the career shift, was because at that company, and it was in a small enough town, I couldn't just go to another company.
Sure.
And I had roots in that town. I didn't have a lot of choice for leaving. And my only choice was to make the situation work for me. And at that point in my career, I thought that a few years around computers, learning them better, I had done a lot of Fortran by that point as a chemist. And I felt fairly comfortable about extending that aspect of being a chemist. But then I really never went back to chemistry.
Sure.
So that was my weird little twist there to it. But I have to say that there are situations in which you really do need to make lemonade out of lemons. And I had a very important person in my life who was Jewish back in the 50s, who had made the same decision for the same reasons. And it was instrumental in him having the spectacular career that he had taken a clearly inappropriate situation and made it and just said, I'm walking away, I'm walking into something else, and made that second thing he walked into truly great. So he was my inspiration, and it worked out well for me. I don't think anybody should have to do anything like that.
Sure.
But it was what made that shift for me.
So now that you're in development, is there a culture or a community around it already, or is it really you and a CompuServe account at that point?
Oh, actually, I started community fairly early. I was in Houston working for this environmental company, which is a different company. It's not this first company, but the environmental company has changed names about 29 times.
Sure.
I was working for them in Clipper and working with the Clipper community in Houston and learning a lot about what community meant. I was also very active on something called Grumpfish. So there's a guy named Greg Leaf, unless I get names confused here, but he had this, he sold a product, and he also had this thing called the aquarium, the Grumpfish aquarium, and I was very active there. Learned a lot about community, was active with Clipper nationally and locally. And then when I decided that I could no longer stay in Clipper because it was falling apart and Nantucket had been sold to CA, and it was this huge disaster. Yeah.
We should do a whole show on just CA buying products and destroying them. But
I knew that game was over when I was talking to somebody and they said, yeah, I was up there. And I got into a cab. This is on Long Island, I believe. I got into a cab, and the cab driver told me that, oh my God, would you believe this guy came out from California and he had a nose ring? Now, this was a long time ago. And I said, oh yeah, that's the lead dev. And so here we had these suits, and I'm going, yeah, the cab driver knows. So, the cab driver knows this guy doesn't fit. So when I left, I went into Visual Basic, and I knew I wanted to be public very quickly. And so I started answering questions on one of the forums, and one of the CompuServe forums. And actually, Robert Scoble picked me up within a month and put me on as a moderator. And we were, it was like history after that. So
Wow.
Deborah Carrata was there, and I was there, and a lot of people were there that are still around. And we got to be friends, and I got to have a community that was online. I was in a new town, and it was great. Community has been very, very important to me. And yeah, I've had it since the mid-1980s.
Nice. So I have to ask this question because I always ask it when CompuServe comes up. Do you remember your number?
No.
Oh, okay.
I had
no
at least
one does.
5 digits.
I have this hope that one person would remember their number,
No,
but not
I had
yet.
like 5 digits. It wasn't real early.
Yeah.
I didn't get into that until about 1991.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't real early. I wasn't really there until I went to VB, and then I wound up with the Fawcett accounts because I couldn't handle. There was more meanness on the Microsoft accounts back then, and I have no patience for that online. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and I had absolutely no patience with it. So I wound up helping to create the Getting Started space, where I had a lot of mad dogs that were going to go after anyone who was mean. If I told somebody to back off and they didn't, they generally regretted it pretty quick.
Sure.
So, yeah. Yeah, you can be pretty mean. I never had to because I had other folks that could be pretty mean coming in to help me out. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So where did you get your sense of working with larger groups of people? I mean, did you work on larger teams at any point in the 90s when you started working with Visual Basic, or?
Well, actually, I've tended to work a lot on small teams historically. So the Clipper teams were fairly small, 4 or 5 people. Before that, when I was with the previous company, we had teams of 4, 5, 6, 7 people, something like that. I think that during those days, that was a sensible team size.
Yeah.
Every time you add somebody to a team, it gets harder. And so now we have a world that's more complicated, and we work hard to break our projects down still into that manageable size. 4 or 5 is too small, but I've worked on a few teams that were a little bit bigger, but mostly I've worked on fairly small teams. Worked with a company in retail for a while where I was actually an employee, and there we had a team of about 6 people total. So we were pretty close to the metal in each other. It makes for good communications.
It does. So
I like it when
ahead.
everybody can sit around the table at lunch, because we solved so many problems when I bought the guys lunch, and they were just, it happened to be guys. I mean, I don't want to sound sexist on that. I happen to have a team of men that was working with me and for me, and I'd take them to lunch, and, we'd start talking, and the weirdest things would come up, things that would never be on a straight line.
Sure.
And it really, really helped us out. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So what about one of the topics that I like to talk about is mentoring, both being mentored, people maybe early in your career that helped you out, or your experience being a mentor to other people that you work with.
Well, I think mentoring for me at least, it's a very fluffy thing. It's not a thing that is cut and dried, and I can say, well, during this time, this person mentored me or that person did. But I look back at people that did a couple of things. They helped me out and gave me advice, and they inspired me. And some of those people I've never met. There's a woman named Linda Rising, who is one of my current heroes, because she must be, I don't know how old she is, but from what I know of her academic career, she must be around 70, and she's still out there. She spoke at, I think, UPSLA or QCon or something last year, 2 years ago, something like that, as a keynoter. She's amazing, and I just think she's awesome. So she inspires me, although I've never met her.
Right.
And same time, there's people, and Javot Lowy and Richard Campbell and Carl Franklin, and these people that have been very instrumental in giving me advice and sticking with me when I had tough times. Certainly in the conference circuit, they're the folks that were really there for me when I still had a lot to learn. And, I would say, well, I'm not getting a lot of people into this room. And they're going, yes, but you're doing these hard topics that are the reasons people come to conferences. And some of those 20 people wouldn't come to this conference if it wasn't for your talk.
Right.
So, they've been really instrumental in a lot of that kind of thing. And I think sometimes it goes both ways. My good friend Julie Lerman and I think there's been times we've mentored each other throughout the years. And so it's a very fluffy thing. I do feel very inspired to help be a good role model. I'm very happy that we have more role models. There was a time about 5 years ago where there were a lot of women over 30, maybe a lot over 30. And there weren't a lot of young women out there. And right now we got so many fantastic young women out there.
You do.
And, if somebody calls me up and says, it happened to be from a guy, I got a question a few days ago that says, I'm coming up on this life decision. It's a business and life decision. Can I talk to you? I'm well, sure. Of course you can. So I think that for me, at least, it's not that I formally mentor very many people, but being available to people, both for them to me and be able to, ask a question and to know, you can be whoever you want to be in this industry. You can wear a nose ring. I mean, not work for CA, but you can wear a nose ring most places in this industry. And, understanding where you're making. If you wear a nose ring, then maybe you're closing a couple of doors. But, there's so many places in this industry, more than any I know of, where it is what you can do and what you can do next that matters most. And I think that's really exciting and cool.
It is. And unlike a lot of other industries, I think, is that, the continual learning that we focus on ends up being, to me, the biggest benefit of being in this industry. Whereas I feel like, some other career paths are out there, and sort of once you understand, the tax code, you're an accountant, and, maybe the tax code changes a little, but you're not learning, a whole new way to do math.
It's interesting because I think different fields have gone through that. And to some degree, I think I was in the tail end of a little bit of that with chemistry. I think chemistry through from about the discovery of the DNA molecule, or a bit after that, through when things got computerized. And that's I wasn't really part of that. It was after I left. But
sure.
You think about the difference between when we drew a protein molecule, we picked up a bunch of big printouts, the old big size printouts, and we drew lines on the 0s, 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and 6s, or however how we went.
Right.
We drew the isotherms on that. And then we drew them on plastic, overlaid onto the computer paper, and that plastic, it was clear like Lexan kind of plastic, went into a box, and we looked at it through these isotherms. That's how we saw. It's the only way we could do it. So chemistry up to that point was very much, how do we make it happen? How do we think and how do we work it out? Well, if you have a protein molecule today and you can get it to be crystallized, you can get that far with it, which is an art, then you can actually just push a button and the computer's going to show it to you.
Yeah.
So there's really a lot of changes in the kinds of ways that you're thinking. And certainly I don't want to say anything bad about all the wonderful chemists doing amazing things today, because there really are astounding things happening. But it's a little bit different. And to some degree, I've gotten to ride that same kind of wave in the computer world. And just like, I guess if I was, still in chemistry, I would be just thrilled about the fact that we don't have to work hard to get from a crystal to seeing a structure once we can get the crystal. Then I think that, I would be as excited there. But right now, we're in that great time of change. But medicine is in that just starting into that kind of a great period of change. And I think that what's happening in medicine, and maybe even more in veterinary medicine, because as we drop costs down, then there's things that we're going to be able to do for animals that we couldn't do before. I think that there's many amazing fields that are that exciting today. My son is one of my sons is an astrophysicist, and he is in a field that is just exploding right now with new information and new ideas. My other son is a mathematician, and that's a very old field, maybe the oldest field we have.
Sure.
And so it changes at a very different pace. There's not all this new stuff going on. What's new there is different ways of collaborating and different ways of doing things, rather than the same kind of new massive ideas and data that we have in astrophysics. So it's kind of cool. There's I don't think we're the only field, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Stuff. I certainly have, myopic glasses on about our particular industry.
Yeah.
So, last big question I want to sort of delve into is how you manage work-life balance, or if you do,
I don't. Well, I laugh about that, and it's a constant battle for me, and it's largely a constant battle about taking care of myself. I think that's the biggest thing. I do have friends inside and outside the industry. A lot of my friends are inside the industry, which affects your work-life balance, because it means that I'm so excited to get to talk to you about this or talk to you about something else. And it's part of, it kind of, in a way, cuts back if you were to count the hours, but it means that my work is some of the happiest parts of my life. I love what I do, which means that the work-life balance isn't misery and joy. It's joy and different joy.
Right.
I don't get out and exercise enough. There's things I don't do enough. But I do have friends outside the industry, and they're important to me. And I do, spend what time I can with my kids. But they're at 27 and 22. I mean, sometimes I have trouble tracking them down. They're pretty busy, both of them. Although I will say this: there's one thing that's maybe almost as good as having a son who tweets, is having a son whose wife tweets.
That's where you get all the real information.
That's where I get the real stuff. Yeah. It's, I don't know. For me, I live a good life. I just absolutely love my life. And so if a work-life balance is that you're happy, then I have a fantastic work-life balance. If a work-life balance is you look at a sheet and you look at the time you're spending at the computer and away from the computer and thinking about computer stuff and not thinking about computer stuff, then its balance is a little bit warped. But but it works for me. It works for me.
That's wonderful to hear. That really is. Well, thank you so much for doing the podcast. I really enjoyed wow, you have quite a story.
Well, it was great fun talking about it. I haven't talked about many pieces of that, so I'm kind of out of the closet right now, and we'll see how that goes. And yeah.
Well, you have a great day, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World Podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World Podcast at hwpod.com.